Welcome to Beyond the Business Card podcast.
So we were kind of the first to actually start advertising. We did the first radio spots. We did the first TV ads. We did the first billboards, first metro advertising. There's no billboard company. We had to go build it. My wife and I literally, when the war broke out, we grabbed 2 suitcases, got on a plane and left, not knowing if we'd ever be able to go back. And I took that to heart. And, I really worked hard to make sure that I was very knowledgeable about how businesses work. I learned finance. I learned how to put a business together and all the other elements of establishing a business and keeping it running. Quickly, you realize that another skill you have to learn is hiring great people, and you have to bring good people to the table. And I think very quickly, your best skill is recognizing great skills. First went to Russia, there was no internet. You had to book a phone call 24 hours in advance.
The collapse of an empire, really. You were there in the middle of it.
Yeah, and remember, this was also a period that I like to call disorganized crime.
From chaos in Moscow to the last flight out, John's story isn't just ads, it's survival, reinvention, and building when there were no rules.
And so there was a lot of racketeering, a lot of corruption. They used to joke that we were the white agency, as things went on, because we played it straight.
Hi guys, and welcome back to Beyond the Business Card podcast with me, your host, Justin Maguire. And today we have a very interesting episode. Today we've got John Rose, chairman of Rose International. Now, John has a super interesting story. John's an American national. He's also worked across the world. He's got significant experience in the Soviet Union and Russia. He's got experience in Cuba. He's worked in the Marcoms world. He's worked in the hospitality world. He's a published author. His story is fantastic, and I can't wait to get into it. John, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
John, I never do it justice when I do an introduction to someone, and certainly with yourself, where you've got such an experience. So would you mind, just for the audience here, giving us a summary of your career and life to date?
That's a big ask. It's a bit convoluted. Well, I'm really basically an old ad guy. I started in communications business in Boston. I went to school for communications. I really wanted to do this my whole life. And I first went into radio, actually. I was in media in Boston. And I learned to write radio commercials and then later television commercials. I went to work for an agency in Boston. I also did a lot of business development. So I brought in one of their biggest clients, a company called Howard Johnson's. And when the client suddenly came to me and said, maybe you'd like to start your own agency, I said, okay. And they became my first client. And then a good chunk of that company got bought by Marriott. Marriott became a client. And then we started just winning more and more business. And we became a reasonably good-sized regional shop in the Boston area, New England area. And at some point along the way, one of my partners, we had acquired a few agencies, one of my partners ran into some Russians on a plane. It was the Soviet Union, it was 1988. He was talking to them. He found out that they were from a Russian newspaper called Moskovskaya Pravda, and they had permission to start the first magazine that could accept advertising in the Soviet Union, because prior to that, there was no advertising. So he said, well, maybe we can help you. Remember, this is pre-internet days. A lot of what agencies like ours did was a lot of publishing, especially if you had hospitality clients. Every company had a magazine. Every city, state had a magazine. And so we knew that space. And we said, we can help you with that. He was an older Czechoslovakian guy. He had been in the war. He had no real love for the Russians, but he went and did a few trips and then sort of said, maybe you can take this from here. And we had a client, Kodak, at that time, who really wanted to get into the Soviet Union. So I brought Kodak into Russia and helped launch them in Russia at that time. They actually came in with some of their technology business, but of course then really wanted to get their film business up and running, and that's what happened. And then I found out that Coca-Cola was going to be opening their first bottling plant. So I knocked on their door, and we became Coke's first agency in Russia. And remember, at this time, it was, very Wild West. There were really no agencies starting yet. I mean, I think that Y&R had some joint venture with a publishing group, but they weren't really doing advertising yet. Ogilvy had some professor who was representing them in market. Again, they weren't really doing any work. They were doing a lot of research, basically, fact finding. So we were kind of the first to actually start advertising. We did the first radio spots. We did the first TV ads. We did the first billboards, first metro advertising, And when I say we did these things, I mean, if you wanted to put up a billboard, you'd have to call engineering, right? There's no billboard company. We had to go build it. If we wanted metro advertising, we had to go down to the metro station on a Saturday morning and help them put frisket film on the side of a car and paint it. So we got all of that going, and we built quite a nice business over the years in Russia. And I think that it all went really well. We went through several coups over the years, ducked the bullets. And during as Gorbachev came in and out. Yeltsin came in, then Putin, and we were very successful for a long, long time. What finally got us in the end was the war with Ukraine, and so we then had to shrink operations considerably in Moscow. And of course, as an American, I have certain sanctions, and so my wife and I literally, when the war broke out, we grabbed 2 suitcases, got on a plane, and left, not knowing if we'd ever be able to go back. Fortunately, things leveled out. Planes started flying again, and she was able to go back. But after 30 plus years, I've never been back. We moved the headquarters basically to Dubai, and now we're doing business here. And we actually represent the government of Dubai for tourism in a dozen somewhat countries.
Wow. Okay.
How was that for a condensed version?
Yeah, it's a pretty condensed version.
I left out a lot.
Yeah, we're going to go back to it, though. We're going to go back to it. Right. So you're from Boston, right?
From Boston.
Okay. Tell us a bit about Boston. So some of our audience, we've got an international audience here. We've got a lot of people in the Middle East. Tell me, what was Boston like to grow up in?
Boston was great. I mean, when I was a kid growing up and coming up in Boston, I actually lived in the suburbs, and I would, be taking the train in as a kid. There were some dodgy parts of the city at that time. I mean, like many cities in those days. But it was always Boston is a great, big, small city. It's got a lot of youth because there's a lot of universities, but it's got that heritage. And a lot of parts of Boston remind me of London, which is why I have a fascination with London as well. Because you go to Beacon Hill in Boston, and you may as well be in parts of London. It was a great place to grow up. I went to Boston College. I'm a real Bostonian at heart.
And parents, where were they from?
They actually both grew up in East Boston, just on the other side of the bridge or the tunnel, depending on which one you took. And my father was an attorney. My mother was a housewife and a small business owner.
Okay. Always from Boston. So over there. Yeah,
I mean, my father was actually in the military at the time that I was born, and so we actually spent some time in Mississippi when I was very, very young. But I was born in Massachusetts, and we returned, and I grew up in Massachusetts.
Okay. And do you have brothers and sisters?
I have one brother.
Still in Boston?
No. He's a partner with Denton's law firm, and I think I injected him with the international bug because before he went to law school, after university, I brought him to Moscow, and he was working for my agency for a while. There are a lot of funny stories about that, but we'll have to save that for another time. But he, I think he got bitten by the international bug. He then went to live in England after he joined a law firm in the States, moved to England, and now is a international man of mystery. He lives part-time here, part-time in the UK, and part-time actually on the Isle of Wight, and part-time in France.
There we go. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of where this international bug was coming from. That was all. Is it a Boston thing? Tell us.
No, I mean, like most Americans, most of the people I know have never lived internationally.
Yeah.
I mean, most of us, whatever country we're from, most of the people we know are not doing what we're doing. Mm. Somehow I got on that plane and went to Russia, and I was enamored by the challenge of it. It's just that, I loved the marketing business. I loved the ad business. I love the creative side. I mean, at heart, I'm a writer, basically. That's what I'm trained to do. That's how I mostly made my living. And I like the challenge of being able to work with multinational clients in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do in Boston. We were getting big clients, but it wasn't at that level. I wasn't writing commercials for Coca-Cola when I was in Boston. That was an opportunity that I got when I went to Russia. And I'm driven by the creative opportunities.
Yeah, you know what? From what you said, I was thinking a lot about my journey as well. Now, obviously, Dubai, when we look at Dubai now, I think they're saying it's coming up to 4 million people. So, it's an international city of the world. But when I first came here and the gentleman we were talking about off camera, even before that, when other people came here, 20 years ago, 17 years ago, Dubai was a very different place. And what opened my eyes to this part of the world, and actually it's why I then opened a business in Asia, is that sort of pioneering opportunity where you could, particularly, you're from America, I'm from the UK, you kind of, they're very mature markets. You can see where things work and how things work. If you can take that, instill that, what you've learned there, and implant that somewhere else, it can fly if you're in the right place at the right time. And sounds like you certainly hit that wave.
I think, having talked to a lot of experts, I think that to that point I think if you enter a market where you feel like there's an inevitability of it moving in a certain direction in your industry or an industry that you have some knowledge about or are interested in, then that sort of puts wind in your sail. You say, all right, well, I can see the future. It's like you have a crystal ball. I mean, it's going to happen. I just have to be in the right place. Am I too early? I'm not too late. Sometimes in Russia, I thought I was too early. And in other places I've been, I was definitely too early. So it's a timing thing. But I think that is absolutely what drives people who travel and, go abroad and get into business, especially starting a business. It's one thing to be brought by a company. It's a slightly different thing. Yeah. You see, a lot of those people always return or think they're going to return. They're sort of rotating. A few of them, the umbilical cord snaps and now they're international people.
Gotcha. So just let's give me a sense of sort of timings here. So did you study and you were a writer? You were a trained writer, you said.
Yeah, I was always. I grew up as a writer.
Okay.
I mean, I've written a lot of things. Certainly, a lot of it in the marketing space. I've written a few books. I've written documentaries. I've written almost anything you can think of that can be written. I've written it, and I think that way. And I think that the thing about being a writer to me is having a curious mind, because if you're a writer, you understand that 80% of it is the learning, the research, the acquiring the story. Very little of it is actual writing. I mean, you can get it down on paper. I still say on paper, but that ages me. But that can be done very quickly, I think, once you know what you're about to do. Most of it is the learning, and I think that's why I'm in the marketing business, because I'm a neophile. I want to learn. I want to learn something new all the time. I like to solve puzzles. I want to get inside of a new business and find out how it ticks. And that's a writer's mind. You have to learn to a certain depth in order to be able to write about something.
But so when you got into the agency world, were you a copywriter then?
I was a copywriter in radio, and I was a copywriter at the agency, and a producer. I mean, I sort of, these are small agencies. You do more than one thing. But I became a creative guy first. In fact, it was my first client, the Howard Johnson's guy named Jack Delahunt, great guy, tough guy. But he's the guy who said, listen, you got a good creative brain, but you better learn the numbers. If you want to run a business, you're going to have to either get a great numbers guy to sit beside you, but I would encourage you to go really understand the business side of things. And I took that to heart. And, I really worked hard to make sure that I was very knowledgeable about how businesses work. I learned finance. I learned how to put a business together and all the other elements of establishing a business and keeping it running.
Yeah, and you said something interesting earlier, which I always like. I've sat across many successful people and interviewed through my recruitment business and in this podcast. You mentioned that you were doing business development as well.
Yeah.
And it's just such a common thread that everyone I see opposite.
Sure.
Like sales is at the heart of everything, right?
I sold pots and pans door to door.
Yeah.
when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Okay? I sold lots of stuff when I was a kid.
Yeah.
I had a paper route when I was 11, but I didn't have one. I had 5,
Yeah.
because that was me as an entrepreneur and I wanted a boat.
Yeah. But it's just you don't meet many creatives who are happy to put themselves into that position, or happy to
Right.
themselves. If you look at typical agency owners, for example, and if anyone doesn't yet understand sort of the agency world, typically the clients, the people that deal with the clients end up being the people running the agency, and typically the creatives less so. You see fewer creatives that end up becoming agency owners, perhaps changing a little bit now, but that's typically been the way things work.
Yeah.
So you were a creative that were interested in the numbers at a time when not a lot of people were doing that. That's what I want to try and understand.
Yeah, well, I wanted to know how to do it all.
Yeah.
I didn't want to have to be dependent upon anyone else's knowledge. Not that I necessarily wanted to do everything, but I needed to know how it worked. So I would say that probably my trajectory was sales first, because I was doing it from a very young age, to being very interested, being creative. Even as a kid, I was, I played instruments. I was creative. I thought of myself a little bit as an artist when I was young, but I also wanted to make money a lot. So I sold, stuff, because I saw that as being the easiest path to making bigger money. And so that's how I sort of moved into these businesses. But then I quickly took on creative roles whenever I could. And then, with good advice, I learned the whole business side of it. So basically, by the time Howard Johnson said, "Why don't you go into business?" I was ready. I mean, I felt like I was getting it going.
You'd seen in essence, you kind of covered a lot of the bases, right? So you felt you were ready to go in. Now, one of the challenges though with people that I've met who've kind of can cover a lot of bases is sometimes the buck can stop with them. They can be the bottlenecks in their own business.
Of course.
So I'm intrigued. So when you launched your business, how did it go? Tell us a bit about launching a business then.
Well, of course, I'm 24, so I knew everything. I think the funny thing about being an entrepreneur is you do have to have a certain blind faith and belief in yourself. You have to have that kind of confidence. So I think that when I first started, I was very lucky because I did have this confidence, and of course, apparently that's what Howard Johnson saw in me. That's what Jack Delhant saw in me. I got lucky because they basically handed me their business. I didn't have to open my doors and go hunt. That was a big chunk of business, and I could hang my hat on that. And if I knew if I did a good job with that and started looking around, other business would come. And I knew I had the sales skills, so I knew that I wasn't afraid of going out and getting the business. I had the creative skills, so I knew I could actually do the work. I was personable. I could manage the account service. I could be the agency at the beginning. Quickly you realize that another skill you have to learn is hiring great people, and you have to bring good people to the table. And I think very quickly your best skill is recognizing great skills in other people, and that's also another fortunate opportunity for me. I brought in some really good people early on, and I worked with them for many, many years.
I bet you also kissed a lot of frogs before you brought in a lot of good people there, right?
Yeah, I feel like I was very lucky. Yes, of course, there were some duds, for sure.
Because that's where I run a recruitment business, right? I've seen this is an element I know very well, right?
Oh, I remember having to call. I remember having to have somebody institutionalized.
Yeah.
There was a lot of stuff along the way. I tend to blank that out and think of only the good things.
Yeah.
But I think that I did get a lot of good people that helped catapult the agency. I remember when we first went to Russia. You have to remember what those days were like. There was no internet. You had to book a phone call 24 hours in advance. Okay, we had fax machines. So on both ends, in Boston and in Moscow, when you came in the morning, there was just a roll of paper sitting on the floor that had rolled out of the fax machine. It was just one long tape. But we could do it. We could pull a magic trick, because I could go to a client in Moscow in the morning. I would go over to like Sony, okay, and we were writing a commercial for Sony. I would go back to the office. I would put together some notes. I would write out a script. I'd fax it to Boston. An art director in Boston would craft all the panels for a storyboard, fax them back to me. And so basically by the next morning, I've got a whole storyboard walking into the client, because we've got this whole cycle. And that worked out quite well for us in the early days.
So it's just so fascinating how you've got this, obviously, clearly a very successful regional business with these phenomenal clients. And then this Russia opportunity is somehow, because of a plane journey, landed on your lap, right? What did the business look like? Because I only say this again, speaking from experience, right? Like every situation is different. But I remember when I had the opportunity to open in Asia and I had the business here. One of the bits that went well was, okay, we were able to cross-pollinate clients, right? We were able to say, hey, we work with you in Dubai, guys can work with us over there. That worked really well. I then tried that in London. It was a complete disaster because what I realized in London was no one gave a shit about who I worked with in Dubai, but in Hong Kong they actually did. But what it did was it took my attention, and where I weakened my business, right, was it took my attention away from the mothership.
Yep.
And yeah, to be fair, probably the mothership wasn't ready for my attention to be swayed by that. So how were you? I'm fascinated to know how you took this regional business that was clearly going very well. Well, I imagine you were kind of at the heart of it because it sounds like your relationships were very solid with your core clients. How were you able to then take that and move it from Boston into Russia without damaging the mothership, or did you tell me?
Well, no, I think it goes to the point before about getting the good people because we had a great team.
Fantastic.
And that team was able to manage the clients in Boston. But remember what I was doing. For 6 years, every 2 weeks, I'd go back and forth between Boston and Moscow.
Right.
So I'd spend half my month in Moscow and half my month in Boston. Exhausting, but I was there enough so that I could get enough FaceTime with clients and I could, through the help of some fax machines, be able to manage my work back and forth. Remember, in those days, we had to get Department of Defense approval to bring in a laptop. And when I say laptop, of course, the laptops were like this. Yeah. But I think that it was because there were good people there. I remember my partner, who had sort of given up on going to Russia, was still running. He could still be there, and he was still part of the business. And so he was there anchoring also the Boston shop. So there was muscle still in Boston, and that's the only way to do it. I mean, if I was holding up the whole thing, then of course it would have been a house of cards. But there were people there to do it.
Great. So you had a good, and I think that's the lesson to take from this for people. You had
you got to finish one project before you start another.
Yeah.
You can't just leave that undone.
Yeah.
And that's the way that worked. But it was me going back and forth quite a lot.
You see, I see this a lot because now I coach quite a few entrepreneurs, and it's one thing I've always noticed with a lot of entrepreneurs is how easily their heads can be turned before they finish the project they got in hand.
Yes.
But that's a big lesson that you've sort of just talked through there, is that you were able to do that because you had a leadership team in place.
We had a good team.
Yeah. Now, I'm quite intrigued. So this is 1988, 89, right?
Yeah. 1989. Yeah.
And the Soviet Union sort of fell apart, in 92?
The wall came down in 91.
Right. Okay.
But it was, it was happening. It was happening. When I first went there, you couldn't own a company.
Right.
In Russia. I mean, over the course of maybe a year or so, the legislation changed. This is how fast it changed. It went from you could maybe own a small percentage of a Russian company, Soviet company, to you could get a bigger percentage, but not over 50%. To over 50%, but you still had to have a local partner. To 100%. This all changed in about a year and a half.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. So it worked in our favor. So really, we were already starting to work, and then we were able to get plugged in as basically the first independent agency.
How were you? I mean, I guess what a period of history you were there during. It's fascinating, like the collapse of an empire. Really, you were there during it, in the middle of it.
Yeah, and remember, this was also a period that I like to call disorganized crime, because no one knew what the hell they were doing. And I met a lot of these guys, early on, because they hadn't become those guys yet.
Yeah.
They were just early on, and they were just sort of moving around, but Russians are quick learners. And so there was a lot of racketeering. You had to navigate some of that. A lot of corruption. You had to navigate that as an American, anti-corrupt practices laws and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I had to, they used to joke that we were the white agency, as things went on, because we played it straight. I remember our general director one time someone walked into our offices and was sort of looking around, just sort of walked his way in. And he said, that doesn't look like you have any security. You might need some protection. Why don't we talk about that? And she was very quick. She says, we've been in business maybe 3 years.
Yeah.
You don't think we've lasted this long without a krisha? Krisha is the Russian word for roof, which
Right.
is protection.
Yeah.
And so he just went away worrying that he might be stepping on someone's toes, and he just wandered off. And that was the only time we've ever had any of that experience. In the meantime, we hear people walking into bars and just saying, "This is our bar now."
Okay.
And those things happen.
Yeah.
Okay? Or there was, we lost 8 bankers in 1 week, in shootings. It was just, because everybody was just trying to open up a bank for a while.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. There was, some suicide bombings and here and there, and
Wow. Okay.
there's a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah.
And then the coup, when Gorbachev was, there was a lot of things that we navigated around, but I never felt personally that I was under, it was dangerous for me. I probably should have, but it was never a problem for me. And we just found it to be interesting. And I think that we had the opportunity of being very early, so there wasn't a lot of competition anyway. So like your point about going into London and not caring that, like, for example, if I went to Moscow today and I said, I'm from Boston, they'd go, who cares? But at the time, I'm the guy that knew stuff.
Yeah.
And as these big companies wanted to get in there, we're helping some of them get there. Some of them are already there. They don't have anybody to really lean on. And so we got very lucky just in our timing. So I don't want to overplay our expertise, but we got good real fast there. And suddenly we're the old guard. And that helped us win business for over 30 years.
And just tell me, so when you went over to Moscow, and obviously you can see that there's heaps of opportunities, did brands in America then, once everything started opening up, were they looking for an entry point into the region, and you were literally the man on the ground?
Correct.
And because you were American, they felt I imagine they felt very familiar and safe in your hands, right?
Absolutely. And remember, it's so different than it is today, right now, okay, with the current circumstances, okay? People are, don't want to deal with Russia, by and large, at least from the American, Western European standpoint.
Yeah.
In those days, as the Soviet Union was coming down, there was a momentum. It was like the Russians and the Americans are getting along. We were, it looked like it was a real kumbaya moment. And so there was none of this hesitancy. It was sort of like, we better get to Russia. And there were a few companies there that were then touting their success. Remember, Pepsi went there during the Nixon administration and was trading Pepsi syrup for Stolichnaya vodka.
Right.
Okay. And in those early days, it was a lot of barter. Our early days was hard to figure out how we were going to get paid.
Yeah.
In fact, we ended up with some 20 Russian bicycles in my office in Boston one day. Apparently that was payment for something. I don't know what it was. Also, remember, we were getting paid in cash lots of times, even for the multinational companies, because on the ground, there wasn't a lot of structured banking systems in place. So things had to get paid. And so a lot of things were being paid in cash. Employees were being paid in cash. So we had this big monster safe that we had to keep everything in. So that was why the racketeering, you saw that there's a lot of cash in those days in all these businesses. And that's kind of why that muscling was accomplished.
I have this recollection. I mean, I'm 45. I have this recollection of watching the news as a kid when sort of the wall came down and Soviet Union opened up, of people queuing for a McDonald's. I remember there was this big story that McDonald's opened their first branch or something, and people queued for like 24 hours to have a Big Mac or something. Am I making that up?
No, I was there.
Right.
I was there when it opened.
Yeah.
No, there was, it was actually McDonald's of Canada.
Right.
A guy named Kohan. In fact, his son went on to start Coca-Cola in Russia.
Okay.
So he became my client. So it was his dad that brought McDonald's to Russia.
Gotcha.
And it opened up. At the time, it was the biggest McDonald's in the world. This is before Beijing and before all the others. And it literally had a queue. There's a big square in front of it.
Yeah.
with trees and things. And the line would go all the way around the square, and it would be a perpetual line because it was just, remember, there were no other restaurants, really. Okay, this was the best restaurant in Russia at the time. So, and by the way, before that, they had to open up a huge facility in order to produce the product, the meats and all that kind of stuff. So they were selling McDonald's hamburger meat in the supermarkets before they even opened because they had one location, but they were creating an infrastructure for hundreds. Anyway, so that perpetual line all the way around became, a cottage industry grew up around it, meaning people started putting out tables, selling stuff because there was always somebody in front of you. Okay, little kids would run to the end of the line, collect money, run to the front of the line so that you didn't have to stand in the line all day, and they would grab your burgers and come running back, and you'd give them a little tip, or you'd pull up in a car. It was a thing.
I imagine. So, tell me, from a business perspective, obviously you've got your Boston agency, you've gone out to Moscow. This is now, no doubt, your head's turned. There's the opening of a country. You're in the prime position to make most of it. What happens to the Boston business? Did it continue?
It continued until we actually ended up doing a deal with a French agency called BDDP that wanted to acquire us. They went on through a series of mergers to become part of Omnicom. And at that moment, we sold off the Boston business. Actually, my partner there sort of took it and then it got sold.
Okay.
And because they were interested in Russia and they were interested in me being in Russia. So it was at that moment that I then, spent a lot less time in Boston and eventually
you went all in.
And eventually went all in.
Yeah.
And so I was fully invested there. And we became part of that group. We were Rose BDDP for a number of years.
Okay.
And then when when Omnicom was going to merge all of that stuff together with TBWA, we exited.
Okay. And you sort of became, you made a name for yourself as kind of one of Moscow or Russia's premier independent Marcoms agencies.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Working with international businesses, working with local or all sorts?
Almost no local. I mean, there were occasional local companies, but remember, especially for many years, there were no great Russian consumer-driven companies, and we were doing a lot of consumer-driven product work. We did some corporate work for some Russian companies, but for consumer-facing FMCG, that didn't really exist early on. Over time, it evolved. So for many, many years, it was really the multinationals. It was the P&Gs. We were Samsung's agency for 20 years. We were,
okay.
We went on to work with some, most of the big players in the market at one time or another, either for an ongoing services or for project work. It was just about everybody.
I mean, until obviously we touched on this on the intro, obviously the recent events, that's made things a little bit difficult. But pretty much before then, a lot of international brands had all their eyes, that Russia's a very important market for them, right?
Moscow's becoming the center for Europe, really, for a lot of factories were being built and then exported out to other countries. It was the center because it was the tail wagging the dog very quickly, and so everybody started. I mean, in the early days, it was a lot of white-haired guys going to Russia. Then later on, it was the place to go. Early on, I think it was the place to retire, but but later on, it became the place that you needed to be in. It was the place to be for a long time.
Okay. And so there's a lot of people here that be interested in growing their business internationally. Now, that's obviously where you got famous, let's call it, that was in Russia. But in any market, growing a business in an international market comes with its challenges. I mean, I've grown businesses in the Middle East. I said the unique challenge you have in Dubai is that you grow a business and no one's really from here, right? So you have this transient the way of scaling.
Which also makes it one of the most welcoming places in the world.
Yeah, but also very hard. Like if sometimes you've got great staff and they leave because their mum's sick, and there's lots of reasons why
every place has its challenge.
Exactly. And Asia also has its challenges as well. What was the challenge of growing a business in Moscow and how did you overcome that? And what did you like? I'm fascinated to learn how the dynamic, you're working with international brands, probably you've got most of your staff are local. How did you go around those dynamics? I mean, I'm just fascinated to hear this.
Well, remember that the first challenge is that in our business, it didn't exist when we got this. So it's
What,
not
the
like,
industry?
so you're in the recruitment
Yeah.
business. Okay. Well, there's no one to recruit. Okay. There's no one from another agency because there's no other agency. So, so what would we do? Well, we had Merck Sharp and Doan, Merck now today, as a client. So who do we hire for an account manager? We hired a doctor. Why? Because that doctor could make a hell of a lot more money working for us than she could working at the hospital in Russia. And so we had, so she learned, so at least she had that side of the knowledge. And so she learned our business versus what we would normally do, which is bring in an account person who knows our business and then teach them, or they would over time learn that particular sector. Right? So we would have to do things like that. We would bring in, production people. Well, we'd have to go to Russian film. I did a lot. Most of our commercials were at the film studios. Some of the directors that I worked with in those days are now Hollywood directors. Okay. Bakbin Bedov and people like that, who now work with, big budgets. They were shooting commercials for little old me.
Okay.
And so you'd have to harvest people from other places, basically.
So it really was, I suppose, higher attitude, trained skill. That's kind of was the mentality that you were really having to go by, wasn't it?
You work with the hand you're dealt with,
Yeah.
right? So we would do that and just be also cognizant of the local culture. I mean, it's and especially in those days, it was nyet all the time.
Really?
And you have to teach people that we can do this, but it's never been done. Yes, I know that, but that's our job, is to do things that have never been done before. And so you have to overcome that not only with clients and other people in the surrounding, but with your own staff. You have to teach them that this is the way it's done. We're always in this business, we're always going to be leaping a little bit outside of our comfort zone. To do great marketing, you don't want to go over tread ground. You want to start something fresh. And so that culture shift was probably one of the bigger challenges.
So it must have been an interesting journey to go on from sort of being the first boots on the ground, if you will, to, I imagine, sort of a decade later being an established player in a market that's probably becoming ever increasingly competitive. But, you had first mover advantage. So what did sort of 10 years down the line, what did life look like in Russia for you then?
Well, it was an interesting transition because remember, I went from zero to there. Zero, by the way, I mean, the joke was, I was trying to explain what advertising meant to people. It's sort of like in the early days, people are standing in line for everything. And they're going, how horrible would something have to be if you actually had to advertise it? Right. So that the concept of advertising was very different. So I started with that. And 10 years down the line, we had done, we'd been working for many multinational companies. We were doing advertising. We had expanded the business into public relations, we had research, we had full production facilities. We had a lot going on that we expanded mostly out of necessity, because it's not like we could just make a phone call and get it done. We had to build it ourselves. So we were doing pretty much everything. And then the business started to evolve. And then you had services. And then you had a lot of competition. I mean, remember, all the businesses wanted to be there. And of course, that invited a lot of competitors for us. So we still had to, work for it. It wasn't like things were just handed to us. We had to keep working. Most of our business was still coming by referral, but still, we had to get into pitches. We had to do it. It was very expensive to do speculative pitches in those days.
Yeah.
You didn't have the technology you have today. If you want to, do a whole pitch that included full-blown TV ads and things like that, it was an expensive process.
Got you. But yourself, I mean, had you taken that principle of putting a leadership team in place? What did your role look like in the business at that point?
Yeah, well, I think that I did the same thing. Part of one of the reasons why I think that I was lucky enough to get good people on both ends, Boston and Moscow, is because I had to. There's no way to do it any other way. There was no way for me to say, I'm going to run it all myself. I had to give it up. I had to cede control. So in Russia, there was a woman who was assigned to us by one of the government entities that we were working with. After the first magazine, other people wanted us to start other magazines. So there was a group called Goss Concert, which was part of the Ministry of Culture, and they wanted to resurrect an old music magazine. So they came to us. Goss Concert, by the way, if Billy Joel came to Russia, that was Goss Concert. If the Red Army Chorus went to London, that was Goss Concert. They were, if it had anything to do with music or theater, it was them. And so she was assigned to us. And when I started the agency, I asked her if she wanted to join us. And so she came on board. She jokes that she says, I debated about whether I should ask you what advertising was at the time, but I just said yes. And so she grew up in the business and became general director. And she, all the way through those years, managed to control that business. And, she's Russian. She could work the ins and outs.
Yeah.
Okay. She's the one that said, don't you think we had a Krisha?
Yeah.
So she was with us for the whole time.
Yeah. What's the wildest experience you had in the early days of that? It must be something.
Oh, by the way, I did end up marrying her. I should probably say that because she'll probably be wild.
Okay, very good. What was kind of one of the wildest experiences you had in those days that you can share for the camera?
I don't know. There were so many different things that were going on in those days, but I don't know. We ended up with a lot of, managing also in PR, managing a lot of crises. So there was a lot of weird stuff that would happen. I remember we were here, I'm not sure this is actually anything that has to do so much with Russia, it has to do with crazy people, but, we were managing Starbucks and, somehow people thought that the water was being tainted. And so they sort of threw themselves on the floor and were doing a sit-in in the middle of a Starbucks and we had to manage that. Or, what else? Oh, there was an interesting opportunity we had. We were working with, you probably know Centrum vitamins.
Yeah.
Okay. They also had another sub-brand called Stress Tabs. Now we had a big budget for Centrum, but they gave us a little bit of money for Stress Tabs. It's like, maybe you could just do something with this other sub-brand. And so I had the idea that we're going to put up a billboard in the middle of Moscow. I mean, literally right near the Russian White House. And I'm going to put a mannequin on the top looking like a guy in a business suit, ready to jump to his death. And it's going to simply say, stop, take Stress Tabs. Now, we put that up and, you talk about traffic stoppers. This literally stopped traffic so much that ultimately they made us take it down.
Okay.
Also, people were stealing the clothes on the mannequin. We had to keep, replacing them. And remember, I also had to get the mannequin to Moscow. So here I am in Boston at Lufthansa. And when pieces of a mannequin go through an X-ray machine, they look suspiciously like a disembodied person.
Yeah.
So it started there and ended up there, but it was very effective. It made all the newspapers at the time.
Yeah.
And for short money, it sold out product. So, I think it won a couple of awards at the time. But
wow.
So there's interesting things like that, but I'm sure that if I think about it more, I'll come up with stories.
So there's also a Cuba story there. So just tell us. So while all this is going on, you've also ventured into Cuba, and just sort of help for the audience sake, help us understand how this has all happened.
Sure. Well, I had started going to Cuba in 2002.
It's a long flight from Moscow.
Well, I was going, well, frankly, if I wasn't in Moscow, maybe I wouldn't have done it because Americans, it was kind of dodgy to be in Cuba from an American standpoint, right? We're not technically illegal, but illegal to spend money there. Okay, it was a Treasury Department issue. And so you had to be very careful. So I'm putting this all on tape, right? I saw the opportunity in Cuba over time, meaning I started going there. I was going there because I loved cigars and I fell in love with Cuba and just going there and having that experience. But eventually we started doing a little bit of business with Cuba, opening up a restaurant in London and Moscow. We got an import business for Cuba, travel business. We've gone into the real estate business. We actually opened up a biofuels plant in the last couple of years. We sort of spun up to all these things. But along the way, as I was doing these passive investments, right, there was an opportunity as Obama came in where things seemed to be changing a little bit. I wasn't sure if the embargo was going to come down, but certainly there was a big shift in Cuba.
Yeah.
And it made it easier for Americans to come in. So I started doing a few things. I basically launched the first agency. And so we were doing a little bit of work, Nestle, Heineken, companies like that. We're also working with the government a bit, Ministry of Culture. We ended up running a huge magic festival. We brought 200 magicians to Havana and took over the downtown, the National Theater, the circus, nightclubs, et cetera, and created this big thing. So we did a lot of stuff in Cuba. And I was working with the president's wife on some of those projects because it's a small place. I mean, it wouldn't have happened if the president didn't like magic, I guess. It's something, and suddenly she's working on a committee with us, and there's no sense of celebrity or security around these people. She shows up driving her own little car. I think it was like a Lada or something like that.
The Castros.
Yeah. No, this was Diaz Canal. This is after Raul had stepped back.
Right. Okay.
And so we were just doing work there. But of course, then Trump sort of choked off Cuba, and then the pandemic.
Okay.
And so we couldn't continue with the Cuban adventure from the agency standpoint. Still a little bit of bits and pieces there, but
you ended up opening I think when we spoke off camera, you told me about a restaurant and bars and stuff you took around the world. Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a foolish move. But when we were in Cuba and those first days, I was there with the general director of a group in London called Boysdale, which some of your viewers might know. And I think that, we were standing in front of this restaurant called Floridita. It's one of these Hemingway hangouts. I get my daiquiris at Floridita and I drink my mojitos at Bodeguita. If you go to Cuba, anybody who's been to Havana, they'll know what I'm talking about. And we're standing in front of it and he goes, this might be a good concept for London. And I said, well, stupidly, if you open up one in London, I'll open up one in Moscow. And we did. London went well for a while. It was a big place. Joint venture with Conran Group, and did well. And Moscow was a disaster from the beginning. It was locusts and fires, and it was not locusts, but we had a chef that had a heart attack and died. Before the opening, we had flooding, we had all sorts of problems, and then it was a financial crisis just as we opened up the doors. So that was doomed from the start. But it was an interesting adventure, and as I said, along the way, by doing that. Making that decision, standing in front of Floridita, that led to a relationship with the Cuban government that led to all these other investments along the way. None of which have been great, but they were interesting. And that kept me close to Cuba and gave me the opportunity to open.
Was there a sense of you were there when the Soviet Union opened up and here you are in Cuba? Were you sort of feeling, hang on a minute, I know this playbook quite well. Were you?
Well, yes. And as my wife says, Cuba's like the Soviet Union was, only warmer.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of that. In fact, a lot of the people would speak Russian because they had been schooled in Russia, in Moscow. And we got probably more cooperation from the Russian embassy in Cuba than we ever got from the Russians in Russia, as far as government is concerned. I think that it was a very interesting time to be in Cuba. They had and we were able to do it because we had the Russian company. So the Russian entity could do business there. I couldn't do it. American businesses couldn't be there. So that kind of relationship between Russia and Cuba, even though it had soured considerably, there was a very bad period. It was a great period when they were there. When they pulled out, it was a horrible period. People were starving until they generated a relationship with South America, with Venezuela mostly, and sort of resurrected themselves a bit. But so there was sort of a love-hate relationship with the Russians. But a lot of those guys had gone to school in Moscow. All of their pilots had been trained in Moscow. And Cuba also had great medical facility. Like after Chernobyl, where did all those victims go? Cuba. That's where they were treated. So there was this kind of relationship. So us coming from Russia, me as an American, they were a little more suspicious of. But because of the Russian connection, we got some play there.
Got you. Okay. You've written a couple of cookbooks as well, is that right?
I have.
Is this from your experience in Cuba? Tell us about.
No. Well, the first one was a book I created and edited, but we had someone else. One of my team wrote it or did most of the writing, but it was the Marriott Hut Shops cookbook, and we really did it as a marketing effort, not as
Gotcha.
a cookbook effort. We did it because Marriott was having their 60th anniversary, and there hadn't really been a book written about it. We sort of took it from this angle of the Hut Shops. The Hut Shops were, by the way, Marriott was called the Hut Shops until the 60s.
Okay.
It was a restaurant group until they started opening hotels. And then they took the family name into it. And so we got that whole history. I interviewed Alice Marriott, who was the founder's wife. He had already passed away. I knew Bill Marriott Jr. and I knew Richard Marriott, the two sons. And we worked with them and we launched this cookbook and to much fanfare. And it sold a ton of cookbooks. We sold 100,000 cookbooks pre-internet. So it was a big thing. The next book was because of living in Russia.
Right.
That was the vodka cookbook.
Yes.
And I think that's pretty obvious, really.
Yeah.
There was a lot of vodka, and as a writer, you're always coming up with, oh, maybe there's a book in this, right? And then you type in Amazon, and you go, oh, 10 people have already done this, right? But no one had written a vodka cookbook. There was a beer cookbook. There was
I've had vodka pasta. Sorry,
that was the only dish I ever found. I could even find
Yeah.
at the time. So I said, oh, this might be interesting. And what was the inspiration was because we were handling a vodka brand. And I was going, maybe I could come up with some food recipes. Then I had this idea of the book, and then I looked, and then I signed with a publisher in the UK, Kyle Cathy, and they bought the rights to this book, and I wrote this vodka cookbook, and went through a lot of vodka to do that. I had a housekeeper at the time who just didn't know I was doing this, didn't speak very much English, and she just saw the bottles piling up. And I think she was ready for an intervention until someone explained to her that this is all for an endeavor that I'm trying to work on here.
Brilliant. So this all sounds like it's a period where things are going well. Things are going great, right? Like the cookbooks, the advertising agency.
Yeah.
Obviously, you've had the experience with Cuba. That's not gone so well, but
listen, it's all in ups and downs.
Journey.
But there was always, if you have your hands in enough, fingers in enough pies, one of them will work out at any given time. And it always seemed like one ball was always in the air.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And things went swimmingly.
Okay. And then we're leading up until, obviously you when you gave your summary, you told us that you had to leave Russia.
Yeah.
Right? It's, obviously the journey is always full of highs and lows, right? Just tell us what that, like, I'm quite fascinated in what the lead up to that. And then obviously having to leave your business and where you are now. Could you just give us,
Sure.
help us complete that story?
Well, remember we were coming out of COVID. So, and we actually did quite well in COVID. We fortunately, even though we have a history of handling a lot of hospitality, it didn't represent that big a percentage of our business at the time. And we were in gaming and entertainment and consumer electronics and all these businesses that went through the roof during the pandemic. And so we survived quite well. In fact, we ended up lowering our costs because we didn't have to keep the enormous office that we had and kept shrinking that, and still nobody wanted to go. So, so everything so we were quite strong coming through COVID. We didn't get dinged. And then the speculation about what's happening in Ukraine, and will he go in or will he not go in, Mr. Putin? It got to a certain point where I was pretty convinced that he probably would, simply because no one had given him an off ramp. And my experience there was with I don't know him, but I know the market. I know the culture. It's difficult to back off. So I felt like that it was probably something was going to happen. But I think everybody, including Mr. Putin, thought it was going to be a cakewalk. He was just going to walk in. They would hand it over like they did Crimea, and that would be the end of it. It didn't work out that way. So suddenly, at the beginning, Biden would say, we're not against the Russians. This is the government move. And so we're going, oh, okay, well, all the companies I'm talking to, we're going, all right, maybe we can survive this. And then very quickly, the sentiment shifted very fast. And now it became very anti-Russian. Sanctions started coming in a big way, hitting both sides of the equation. and the companies had to get out. Some were being forced out. Some, over time, some were getting nationalized. You could, and leading up to this, you can feel it a tightening, in the market, just of freedoms. I joke that, if you missed the Soviet Union the first time, hey, it's back. But it was getting tight. And so soon as the invasion happened, we wanted to get out, my wife and I, and we had to look at all of these, lots of things. We lost a lot of people, but we were getting calls every day from our clients going, we're going to have to pause. We're going to have to hit the pause. And this was like, dozens of clients. Pause. So we said, all right, well, the writing's on the wall and we don't know what's happening here.
Yeah.
I'm getting sanctioned. I'm going to, we have to think about this. So we said, well, where should we be if it all goes worst, in the worst possible scenario? And we said, we probably shouldn't be here. So we grabbed 2 suitcases and headed for the airport. But we couldn't do that right away because we had COVID. So the 2 of us were on nebulizers and we're trying to stay out of a Russian hospital for 2 weeks, trying to breathe. And literally there was a last flight out, Aeroflot flight out, because they said they were going to close all the flights west. And so I booked that last flight. And we made it to the airport. We were still a little bit wheezing. We just didn't want to, remember in those days, you didn't want to cough on an airplane, right? So we're there with masks. And we're waiting. As we get to the airport, we see many other Aeroflot flights being canceled. We were getting the stories that a number of Aeroflot flights were in the air and turned around because the aircrafts were being captured because of the sanctions, and all the leasing companies were taking the aircraft. So if Aeroflot found that out mid-flight, they go, come back.
Wow.
And so everybody was on this plane. It almost looked like our flight was going to get canceled, but everybody got on the plane, some of them from planes that had been turned around. It was the quietest flight I've ever been on. I don't think a baby squeaked. And no one knew if we were going to actually get there until we touched down. And at the time, all the other flights were being shut off. All the other airlines had closed off Russia. And we didn't know whether it would come back or not. So it was a little bit like
You got to Dubai.
last chopper out of Saigon, we landed in Dubai. And so we came to Dubai. Now, leading up to that, since as I'm wheezing, I was working on setting up a company here and making sure that that we could have visas, residency, because there's not a lot of places we could just jump to. Couldn't even fly west. So we had to pick a place to live too that would make sense. I have a Russian wife. I have a little bit more freedom as an American, but not so much freedom for her. So Dubai was the best option. And we said, all right, we'll get here and we'll figure it out from there. So we literally just flew here and got into a hotel. And then we sat and thought about it.
Yeah. And what about your team? What about what you left behind?
Yeah. So we were obviously minute by minute communications with everybody. We had to try to create a soft landing as best we could for everybody, but it was a sad time. That was the worst of it. Worst of it was having to let go of the people.
So you had to let go of the bit.
We had to let go of a lot of the people. There are some people that obviously we managed to keep on. I managed to pull some people back to do work in the region. Whether they're still in Russia or not, they may be in other places, but virtually, this virtual thing is the salvation, right? I mean, if you couldn't work virtually, then I don't know how we would have navigated all that. And so we had to manage, we actually, my wife and I, we spent about 5 months in France. We came from here. As we were here, we had no place to live. We're basically homeless. We didn't know what was happening with all of our stuff in Moscow. We had a full flat. We had offices. We had people. So a friend of mine had a place in France. He had a couple of gîtes out, a separate house he had just restored. And he said, "You're about to go into summer in Dubai. Ramadan starting. What are you going to do there? Whatever you're going to do there, you could probably do it from here. So here I've got, I got a house for you. So it's good to have friends." So we went there. And we spent the next 4 or 5 months there and worked on rolling up several entities in Russia, managing cash transfers and most of the people, and finding safe haven for some of the smaller clients, which we put into a partner there's some
Wow.
things, so we had to navigate all of that, and keep something alive there because, things could turn around.
Yeah.
I mean, when nobody at that time, we didn't know how long it was going to take. It's still going on. But remember in those early days, it looked like, how long could this last? A month? Now it's 3 years. So we still kept things alive in Russia, and we still do business around it. I just can't do business with Russian entities. So.
Okay.
So I want to sort of just complete the journey on this by just understanding, clearly you were on a great run. How is you, the business owner? So how are you feeling about what you've built? Like, did you feel like, oh my God, through no fault of my own, the walls of Jericho have come tumbling down?
Right. Yeah. Especially having survived so many of the rough and tumble times, right? So yeah, I mean, you start to think about your legacy. I mean, you start to, you would, I would talk about Russia, here's my claim to fame. Now it's my claim to infame. And what will that legacy look like? And over time you come to grips with, I mean, first it was the people, then it was the money, because, even though it wasn't, I didn't have all my eggs in one basket, but it was a hell of a big basket. And so that was a big punch to the gut. But I looked at, after you stop feeling sorry for yourself, I started looking at it as an opportunity. And also, by the way, landing in Dubai, I sort of fell in love with Dubai real quick. And I'm going, oh God, I'm so happy I'm not in Moscow anymore. I'm a water guy. What the hell was I doing landlocked in Red Square, right? So I loved the idea of now, okay, this could be interesting. We're not poor. We're doing fine. There was never any fear of that. We've done well enough. But I was looking forward to the next opportunity.
Yeah. And what does
that's the entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah. And I love it. I love it. It's good resilience shining through, right? And it's like, actually, in all this crap, you've actually thought, what cracks me up about what you just said is there's all that stuff going on. Like, your business has been, by the sounds of it, decimated in many ways, but you're coming through it. And then you're going, you know what? I'm actually living in Dubai now, and I quite like it. I only would have come here because of this situation. So
exactly,
and that is the mindset of an entrepreneur.
Also, entrepreneurs are really good at lying at themselves. Right?
Yeah. No, I love it. And how does the business look today? Because you touched on it again in your summary that you're in a position now where you're carving a niche for yourself here in Dubai.
Yeah.
And so tell us a bit about.
We're very happy to be here. I mean, we got very lucky. We obviously, as I told you, we spent a number of months rolling up the Moscow operation, fortifying other places, and we have presence in other parts of the CIS, seeing what we could do with our current client base and all of that. But we got lucky right away. We won Dubai Tourist. Suddenly, there was a opportunity to get Dubai tourism for a dozen countries, including all the Russian-speaking countries, as one block. And so we pitched for it, and we won. And
I mean, you couldn't have been more perfect for that business.
We were perfect for that business. I mean, I'm sure we weren't the only. We definitely weren't the only ones in the mix. There were other agencies that were trying for it, and other agencies that already had history with Dubai. But we had done some serious work in that area. We'd represented Tunisia, Malaysia, Portugal, cities and states in the U.S., and a variety of other enterprises, a lot of hotels, airlines, et cetera. So we were very well positioned to win this business. And I think that the fact that we were also here in Dubai and there, because most of the other agencies that were pitching did not have both locations, I think that also helped. The fact that I could appear in their offices, but that was a great starting point for us, because then it's a bit of a calling card, right? And we're kind of vetted, and we felt good about that. That we were being sort of like an official welcoming to Dubai, even though now our job is welcoming people to Dubai.
Yeah.
And then we started bringing on other business, and we're working in Saudi, and we're doing all of that. And I personally do a lot of advisory work, which I like. It's sort of my second act in doing board work. My first act was working with large enterprises, and now I typically work with more mid-sized companies.
Gotcha.
And I like doing that as well. It's kind of a side gig. I mean, I got plenty to do at the agency, but I like that.
And people bring you in to advise on how to structure and build and grow a business, how if they're interested in the Russian speaking market, I imagine various
Actually,
things.
most of my advisory work has nothing to do with Russia.
Okay.
I've got companies in the U.S., and Switzerland, and India, Germany. So I
Just leveraging your experience.
just leveraging my experience. I mean, you get asked to do things, and I sort of leaned into it a little bit. This was kind of during COVID. During COVID, when you're spending a lot more time at home, and you're thinking, you're sort of reevaluating a little bit. The business was doing great. Remember, at this time, the business was doing fine. So this was like, that's how I ended up in Cuba. The business is doing great. Maybe I could do something else. Maybe I could, that entrepreneurial brain. And so, in this time around, I'm going, oh, well, maybe I'll do a little bit of board work again. And I started looking at that. And then that sort of took on its own momentum at the same time as we were coming into advice. So I was actually doing advisory work through this whole period as well.
Gotcha.
While we were transitioning. So I had a lot to keep me busy.
Yeah.
And we still had a lot of client work even as we were pulling out. So there's a lot of out of Moscow because we still had other things.
Yeah.
So wasn't like I lost my job. It was just, okay, we lost that big piece. Now let's refocus.
Yeah. John, we have a tradition in this podcast, and we always, because we're obviously here to provide advice to entrepreneurs, and your story is fascinating. Grit, resilience, you've got everything there. What advice would you give? The tradition is we want to leave a nugget of advice to our viewers. What advice would you give to any aspiring entrepreneurs right now?
Oh, that's always the tough one, right? It depends on who you're talking to. I think that a lot of entrepreneurs tend to jump into businesses that they don't know well enough. I think that there's a lot of in fact, it's most common with the most intelligent people who've had success in the past, who think they can do anything, that it's innate. And I think that it's more about making sure that you really understand a business before you jump into it. That's something that you have to know. I felt like when I went to Russia, I knew the marketing business, and I can draw from, a great knowledge of what that business looked like in other markets. And I knew I could apply it, and I knew I had an advantage. So I would say that one thing is just to make sure you really know the business you're getting in. I've been in and out of the restaurant business. I don't think there's a business where it's more common for people who've never been in the restaurant business before, but because mama made a great pasta, and I've got this list of recipes, maybe I can be in the restaurant business. That's a recipe for disaster. So, pun intended. And like what I did there?
Yeah.
And so I think that it's just a real, knowledge of that business. Make sure you go do it first before you jump in. It's not just having an idea. You got to make sure you have the skills. A lot of people get into business who've never actually even run a business before, and they don't realize it's not just the thing they're doing, that whatever the business concept is, it's the running of the business. You got to make payroll. If you've never gone through that before, you're in for a rude awakening.
Very sage advice. Thank you very much for sharing it. And thank you for sharing your story today, John. It's been an absolute pleasure. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this show. It's been an absolute joy to talk to John. I so much sage advice shared there. I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Thanks a lot.